Welcome to the Tank Podcast. In this week's episode, Vijay Prashad discusses Roberto Fernandez Retamar's landmark essay, Caliban, a piece on the emergence of sovereignty in the colonized world.
Wow. This is an interesting lady, Yoko Tawada.
Okay, I think maybe we should start.
Please, because otherwise I'm going to... Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful magazine. Congratulations.
And initially I thought, and I was kind of doing it to be a bit clickbaity, I thought it'd be funny to do a comparison between the Green Book and neocolonialism by Nkrumah, just because kind of Gaddafi makes people feel uncomfortable. But I thought a sort of Tank audience might be more interested in Caliban because while Nkrumah is more about economic imperialism, it's mostly about finance, and then Gaddafi is more about social cohesion, Caliban is about cultural imperialism, which is what we do here. And so I guess with that all said, maybe if you could start by sort of explaining the sort of the archetypes that are being discussed, and then maybe where you sit in the argument.
Yeah, to begin with, it's interesting to think about that period of the 1960s and 70s, because this is an era that we call the era of decolonization. And so part of the whole decolonization impulse was the return of humanity to hundreds of millions of people at the time, now billions of people in the third world. I mean, what colonialism does is interesting. Not only does it steal the wealth of these parts of the world, just take the gold and silver from South America and just vacuum it to Europe, to the United States, and so on. Not only does it do that, but it suggests that there's an international division of humanity, that somehow people who are African or people who are from Latin America or from Asia are not human. They don't participate in the great story of humanity. They're somehow out of it. And if you want good evidence of this, you can read one of the most enlightened period of people of his era, which was Hegel. Hegel was extremely, well read and thought well of the possibilities for humanity. But when Hegel wrote his philosophy of history, he decided that Africa has no history, Asian history is not capable of advancing to the Greeks, and that Latin America, and indeed all of the old Americas without conquest, was a history of dreaming. So these were people not only without history, but without humanity. They didn't have the capacity to participate in the story of humanity. So the intellectual challenge of decolonization was happening across the third world. It wasn't merely happening here, there, or it was happening everywhere. And it wasn't just happening on the left. So that in Mexico, one of the most interesting writers, Octavio Paz, wrote a book called The Labyrinth of Solitude, about 10 years before Retamar writes his text on Caliban. No, maybe 20 years before, in the 1950s. The Labyrinth of Solitude is produced by Octavio Paz. Paz is a man with a conservative bent politically, becomes the ambassador from Mexico to India and so on. Extraordinary well-read person. In his book, he writes about the way in which Mexico, under the shadow of the United States, which had fought a number of wars to liberate itself from first the Spaniards and then the Mexican Revolution of 1911. Yet in the 1950s, Mexico wasn't confident enough to be, a country with its humanity shining. It wasn't confident enough. It was feeling out of the great story of humankind. And so that debate from Octavio Paz all the way out to China in a different period where Mao says in 1949 the Chinese people have stood up. He's indicating that we are no longer on our knees. We have stood up. We need a new literature. We need a new language and so on. So in that entire debate, intellectual decolonization, the question rises, what does the intellectual do? What is the role of the intellectual? And actually, let's not even start with Retamar. Let's start again somewhere else. Let's start in Iran. In Iran, Jalal Ali Ahmad writes, one of the best known books in Iran at the time called Gharab Zadagi, which means the bad breath of the West. In this book, what Jalal Ali Ahmad argues is that, for God's sake, people, we sitting in Tehran know the latest Francois Sagan book published in Paris, but we don't know who Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana is. We don't know who that is. We don't know who's writing the best fiction in China. We just don't know. We are so dictated by what's happening in Europe that we don't have our own brains intact.
And that still goes on today.
Of course it goes. In fact, it sometimes feels worse than it was then, because at least then there was a debate about it. Now there's not a debate about it. Now we've come elsewhere with identity politics and virtue signaling and things like that. Then it was the fact of a political statement. We need to know ourselves. Yeah, we need to know ourselves. But how? That's the question. How? 1968 in Havana, Cuba, the Cubans hold a massive conference on culture. It's a massive conference on culture. In 1966, they had held the Tricontinental Conference in 1966, where they brought movements from all around the world. But 2 years later, it's a conference on culture. And Fidel, who's 100 years old this year, gives a remarkable speech at this conference where he basically says that, we are not only, Vietnam is not only being fought in the trenches, but it's also fought with the pen. That this is a cultural struggle. It's not only a struggle in the battlefields. It's not only guerrilla warfare. It's a battle of ideas. It's a battle of emotions. That's Fidel's argument. Yeah. Imagine this. This is 68. Yeah. I think around the next year, M.S. Cesar, the remarkable, he's a poet. He writes plays, he's a politician, he's one of the founders of Negritude. He writes a play which is a rewrite of Shakespeare's The Tempest, where he puts Caliban, the great Caliban, silent mostly in Shakespeare, the great black hero for M.S. Cesar. He puts him at center stage. And he basically says, I'm rewriting Shakespeare, rewriting the slave in Shakespeare as the hero of, let's say, the Haitian Revolution. This is now Toussaint Louverture, on stage.
But Toussaint Louverture was from Petit Bourgeois.
It doesn't matter to him,
it's sort of
because M.S. Cesar is not, he doesn't have the class thing so firmly in place. His whole thing is, first, let's deal with the race issue. Yeah, right. It's Caliban, who will speak now. Caliban, who had been silent, will speak. So this itself is a pretty interesting development, that you have M.S. Cesar, with all the weight of surrealism, of negritude, all of that in his arsenal, produces this remarkable play where you have Caliban, centered now, taken from Shakespeare, put front and center. Retamar is aware of all of this. He's in the middle of other debates in Cuba. Yeah. There are debates in the Cuban Revolution of what should a revolutionary intellectual do. How much is a revolutionary intellectual capable of being critical of the revolution? What is the standpoint of the Latin American Revolution regarding US imperialism? Remember now, we are in the early 1970s. The Cuban Revolution is consolidated. Cuba has fought off the United States at the Bay of Pigs. In Chile, distant Chile, Salvador Allende has come to office. He's in the middle of the popular unity period. Retamar produces a landmark essay where he basically argues, wait a minute, we don't need the soft hands of Ariel. We don't need gentleness towards Yankee imperialism. We need toughness. We need in a way, even let's say, we need brutality, we need Caliban, we need to be direct and blunt. So in this whole debate around decolonization, where you have the entry of a set of different assumptions and ideas, Retamar says, speak bluntly. Speak bluntly.
Yeah. And actually, well, there's a few branches to go down from what you said. The first from what you were talking about earlier is this question of how long our history is and like what history can we draw from. And a lot of Caliban is about this feeling that Latin America has kind of been sapped of its real long-lasting history. And part of his argument is to do with like the mestizo-ness, the kind of that there isn't like a fixed racial identity. But then we also have similar struggles, or maybe dissimilar struggles, in Iran and India, for instance, and today, a lot of people are constantly bringing up like this long civilizational history of Iran. But how much difference do you think it actually makes? Or how significant, or how does it change the kind of nature of dealing with imperialism if you have this millennia-long history as opposed to in Latin America, where they're trying to develop their own history in real time?
It makes a big difference, in my opinion. It makes an enormous difference. I mean, there is an anxiety in Latin American, even anti-imperialist culture, but in general, Latin American culture about complicity. Retamar, after all, isn't somebody who is indigenous to the continent. His ancestors were brought there to settle on the continent.
There's same with Marty.
Yeah, same with everybody. I mean, Castro's father comes from Spain directly. Yeah, so there is this sense of relatedness with the Western experience. Yes, there's imperialism. Yes, there is the subordination of Latin America. A Creole continent, which is not quite as important as the center. Spain treated Latin America, even though these were settlers, differently, didn't allow them certain advantages and so on. That's why Bolivar and San Martin and O'Higgins fight for freedom in their countries. They're angry with Spain, for good reason. But there's an anxiety because, the people who now live there also participated in a genocide against the indigenous people. They wiped them out. So there's a slight anxiety in Latin American culture around the question of being anti-imperial in the same way that, let's say, somebody in Iran could be anti-imperial. We'll come to that in a minute. Let's stay with Latin America. Remember, the anxiety is also in language, because the language being used there is Spanish. Spanish is recreated in this period as a language of anti-imperialism. It's not English. It's not the Yankees' language. Therefore, it's got this this kind of tenor of being an anti-imperialist language. Yeah. But let's move to Asia. The Chinese can claim thousands of years of unbroken history. Yes, they suffered a century of humiliation from the first Opium War in the 1830s till 1949. Yes, century of humiliation. But they fought it off. They defeated colonialism in 1949 with the Chinese Revolution. And they have a relatively unbroken history that goes back thousands of years. Yeah, it's something that they can look back to, traditions, ways of life, and so on. Iran, as much as that, thousands of years. You can go back to the period of Xerxes and Darius the First and so on. You can go back thousands of years and say, that's our history. We speak the language of our forebearers. We're not speaking French, English and saying it's not the... No, we are speaking Farsi. We have an old language. It predates Islam. It's got this sense of cohesion to it, yeah? So this is important. This is there in the writers of the 1950s, 60s, 70s in Iran, the people who are trying to uncover what is it to be an Iranian after 1945, and then after the fall of Mossadegh's government, overthrown by a British-US coup in 1953, what is it to be an Iranian? I'm thinking of course, again, Jalal Ali Ahmad, but also Ali Shariati, trying to work out, what is Iranian, the linkages between the kind of Islam that developed in Iran, its own culture, its long history. This idea of the civilization can't be brushed aside. It plays a role, it's resonant. It resonates with people. And it's politically unstable. So in India, it can move sharply politically rightward, with the growth of the Hindutva movement, where they will then go back to the past and say, we have this old civilization, it's important, and it becomes anti-Muslim. And it goes sharply to the right, becomes pro-US and so on. But in Iran, it's also unstable. You can't say, because Iranian politics is so hard to categorize. It's neither left nor right, but it's certainly anti-imperialist. It's neither left nor right, but it's certainly anti-imperialist in its character. The civilizational idea is mobilized in the service of demanding protection for Iranian sovereignty. Similarly in China, demanding a protection for Chinese sovereignty. These ideas are there in Latin America. The word soberanidad, for instance, is crucial in Spanish. It's a crucial word. It's there in Retamar. Soberanidad is very, very important. But here's the problem, is that at the same time, you can get Javier Milei, the president of Argentina now, saying that we must defend the West. We must defend the West. We must defend Western civilization, he said, at Davos, at the World Economic Forum. We must defend Western civilization. Can you imagine Ali Khamenei going to Europe and saying, we must defend? No, Ali Khamenei wrote a letter. He didn't write it. The political, they sent a message to the United Nations saying, we call for a dialogue across civilizations. This was just before 9/11, in 2000, 2001. We call for a dialogue across civilizations. Not we must defend the West. That's the slight opening and anxiety in India.
Which is why, Reza Pahlavi is such a fantasy, because when he comes and says it,
it's ridiculous.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. He's a mockery. How can an Iranian who claims the peacock throne, by the way, peacock throne is stolen from India, just fair cop, Nader Shah, thanks a lot, fair cop, give it back to us. But somebody who claims the peacock throne, which has, it doesn't matter whether the peacock throne sits in Tehran or in Delhi or wherever, because it's a similar cultural world. It's a very similar cultural world. The language I grew up with has its roots in Farsi. So there's a similar cultural world. But what's very interesting is the ridiculousness with which, somebody from that part of the world, they would sound utterly idiotic, saying we must defend the West. But you can't say that in Latin America, and that's why I say there's a slight anxiety that you can detect, which is why when people like Fidel Castro talk about the battle of ideas, the battle of emotions, they root their fight not in civilization per se. They cannot. They root their fight in the ideas of sovereignty and history. So Fidel goes to Jose Marti, Hugo Chavez goes to Simon Bolivar. They go to history, they go to sovereignty, they don't go to civilization, because they don't have access to that kind of argument. Whereas in Asia, in China, the Xi Jinping, the leader of the Communist Party of China, can go to something like our history, our past, which is rooted in Chinese civilization. That's something that you can't see so much in Latin America, because it's much more anxious and complicated.
I guess I wasn't trying to imply, it was a loaded question. I wasn't trying to imply that it made no difference, but as you say, that civilizational history is actually politically unstable. And so bringing it back to the immediate history surrounding Caliban, I think what's sort of remarkable is because I think the intuition would be that civilizational history is really positive for social cohesion. But if we compare two instances, so in Cuba at the time, what's going to happen 4 years after this piece comes out, as he's in the middle of this tumultuous debate about the Padilla thing, which I guess we'll get into, 4 years from then, I think, but also in that period, smaller skirmishes and small operations, they're going to deploy tens of thousands of troops in Angola. And so if you compare that to Iran today, I don't know about today exactly, but over the past few years, I've had just anecdotal stories from people who are very suspicious about Iranian support for Hamas or Hezbollah or Ansar Allah, like largely on an economic basis. They say, well, we're suffering economically, how can we afford to do this? So maybe the social cohesion isn't actually as strong in Iran, but how was it then that, because it's sort of this mysterious kind of mythical thing in my head that I don't really, I don't have the capacity or like I haven't read enough to comprehend. What is it that gave Cuba that political economy to be able to do something like that?
Yeah, so to finish the thought on civilization, which you pick up on, no, because of this unstable thing, it occurs to me it's important to put on the table the fact that both Retamar and M.S. Cesar, in order to have this debate, go to a canonical Western text, which is Shakespeare, to revisit and to kind of turn Shakespeare on his head. This is not something that you have. You don't see this in writers in Iran, in India. They are not going to a Western text to turn it on its head. They are going to their own traditions. And so that's also interesting, this instability of civilization, and then the curious position of Latin America and the Caribbean, where you are sort of in a way, and maybe Millet is right, you are sort of in a way caught up in the Western narrative, which others may not be. We might have had Shakespeare imposed on us as part of the colonial curriculum, but Shakespeare wasn't necessarily, the bread and butter of your thinking. Yeah, that's one side of it. See, just think about Cuba. It's 1959. Cuba has conducted a revolution. It's a very small island in comparative terms, extremely close to the United States physically, yeah. Also politically had been subordinated by the United States economically and so on. Cuba was adrift. It was alone, yeah. There's no way that Cuba could have closed the island down and decided we are going to create a revolution only here. It had to expand, otherwise it was going to die. And so Castro immediately goes on a Latin American tour. He visits Venezuela, that's the first country he goes to. He goes around and he starts to say, we need everybody's assistance and support. Yeah, Che Guevara goes abroad. He's the Minister of Industries. He gives a remarkable speech in Algeria about the importance of solidarity and a kind of socialist solidarity. He goes to Gaza. He goes everywhere. He goes to India. Che Guevara is visiting the world trying to build relations for beleaguered Cuba. Cuba, just 7 years after the revolution, hosts the Tricontinental Conference. So it's an incredible feat that this country under siege does all that. But, and here's the important thing, Cuba also recognizes that as you create medical care for your people, as you create literacy campaigns for your people, you can't not take these gains outside. Cuba was always going to have an internationalist outlook politically. So both in terms of survival, it had to be internationalist, had to look outward for survival, and at the same time, politically, it was internationalist. That is, if Cuba can solve literacy, si puede, yes we can inside. You take the reading campaign, the literacy campaign, or alphabetization campaign in Cuba, you take that and you export the module to other countries, yeah? You take the medical knowledge you have and you export it to other countries. There's an earthquake in the Andes, you send a team there to help. You demonstrate that Cuba politically is internationalist. So both the needs of Cuba to get solidarity and support, but also politically to show we are not just about the Cuban people, we are about everybody. So your support isn't again just for Cuba, but it's for the globe. Cuba is a symbol of what the world can be. We can solve problems of illiteracy, ill health, and so on. So to understand Cuba's internationalism, you need to understand it both in terms of the solidarity for Cuba, but also Cuba's political role as a laboratory for the whole world, particularly the third world. because they were solving problems for very poor people. That you could, if you can solve it in Cuba, you can solve it in Zambia. That was the argument. It was a political exercise of power. We can solve it here, we can solve it there. Okay, so that's the internationalism. But let's think, in a different way. That's different from what Iran, particularly under the leadership of Qasem Soleimani, was doing with Hezbollah and Hamas and so on. It's very different. It's much more similar to what the Chinese are doing, but much less publicly, where they do send doctors around the world to different parts of the world to conduct. I was once on a train in Morocco, and I saw a group of 4 Chinese women. I went and said hello to them. What are you doing in Morocco? They said, oh, we are doctors. Oh, very interesting. We come here as a brigade for so many years for women's health. So we have a clinic just for women's health. Very interesting. They don't advertise it much. That's one thing. What Iran did is something different. Iran thought this through very well. Iran's idea was that Iran was not going to get a weapon of mass destruction. So both Ayatollahs had said that pretty openly. And why is that so? That's because they had experienced mustard gas and so on from the Iraqis during the Iraqi attack on Iran. So what Iran had to think about is what can be the deterrent? If Iran, unlike say North Korea, if Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon, how are you going to deter a US attack? So one way to do this was what Qasem Soleimani and people before him had theorized, which is that you have these circles of protection where you raise the price of attacking Iran. If Iran gets attacked, then Israel is going to get hit by somebody close by Israel. And that's a very cheap way for Iran to build a deterrence. So they built a deterrent force. Now, it happened that this deterrent force also lined up with their politics. Because on the one side, it's the pro-Palestinian politics, so they were okay with supporting a group from the Muslim Brotherhood, which is Hamas. Hamas is not a Shiite group. Hamas is not even a non-political Palestinian liberation group. It's decidedly a Muslim Brotherhood organization initially supported by the Turks and Qatar. And Iran had no problem supporting Hamas, a Muslim Brotherhood group, not Shia, because of the commitment to Palestinian liberation. Okay. In Lebanon, it's different because this is a long-standing connection between the mountains of South Lebanon and the people of Iran. The people of Iran, Iraq, and South Lebanon, the elite groups, intermarried for generations. Ahmed Chalabi, for instance, of Iraq, the guy who was going to be parachuted in by the United States as the president of Iraq after the fall of Saddam, his family, he's married into the elites of the southern part of Lebanon. They have long-standing connections. I was eating dinner with some people once in Saida in southern Lebanon, and the lady there, very cultivated person, said, my brother is Ahmed Chalabi. She said, I'm embarrassed to say it to you, but that's the situation. Yeah? Well, no need to be embarrassed. You can't count for your brother, I'm sorry. But anyway, this support for Hezbollah does come along lines of sect and religion. It's the support of the Shia of southern Lebanon who are getting clobbered by the Israelis and who fought back against the Israelis. They needed support. Turned out this lined up well with the idea that it's a defense of Iran. So Iran's internationalism was to a great extent through the idea of the defense of Iran. That's not exactly how the Cubans saw their export of their revolution, even sending troops to Angola. Now imagine, what does Angola have to do with Cuba's defense? Nothing really. But Fidel understood a couple of things. One is that being a continent or a hemisphere, the Americas, entirely shaped by the labor of people stolen from Africa, there was a historic debt from the Americas to Africa. That was one thing Fidel talked about on numerous occasions. Cuba owed a debt to the African continent. There's a large Afro-Cuban population and so on. That's one. Secondly, the defeat of of apartheid South Africa was actually strategically very important to weakening US imperialism. So for that political and geostrategic reason, the support for Angola, these are all different forms of international solidarity. I give you that, yeah? But the places they come from, the kind of arguments that are underneath them and the meanings they have in the world, the impact is very different. And in that sense, the Iranian internationalism of this current period isn't so much altruistic. Yeah, it has very much its own national interests at play.
Yeah, I guess my question was more about what is the cost for the population?
Yeah, that was your last part of your question.
Yeah.
I mean, what is the cost for a population?
And how do you withstand that?
Yeah, it's a question that's, I'm going to say it rudely.
Okay.
Because you said it was a conversation you had with somebody here.
No. This was someone in Iran.
In Iran.
Someone
okay.
in Iran who was very much against.
Right.
The
Why are we supporting these
exactly,
people?
Yeah.
Well, then they didn't understand Qasem Soleimani's strategy, because this was not entirely altruistic. That's the point I'm making. This person is misconstruing the situation. For instance, you see, the United States and Israel were clever. They spent a better part of 2 years breaking Iran's front lines, smashing Hezbollah, killing Syed Hassan Nasrallah, smashing Hamas, grinding Hamas down, in a sense also trying to hit Ansar Allah. Ansar Allah is the cockroaches of the Middle East, They're never going anywhere. They keep coming back. They keep firing missiles. I don't know where the missiles are being produced today, but they keep firing the missiles, They never go. But they did grind Hezbollah. They did overthrow the government in Syria, which meant that a lot of pro-Iranian and also Palestinian groups were removed from Damascus. They slowly broke down Qasem Soleimani's shield that he had built. And then the attack on Iran became quote-unquote easier. What they didn't factor in was Iran's escalation ladder very quickly would mean restrict the Strait of Hormuz, hit US targets in the Gulf states. They didn't fully anticipate that.
Which is sort of baffling, because lots of people did anticipate that.
Yes, of course, people did, but somehow I don't think they thought the Strait of Hormuz through. I think they thought, okay, we can open it easily, or we'll hit Iran so hard that they will break. They underestimated the capacity of the Iranians to withstand the attack, and also
the social cohesion.
The social cohesion and the Iranian government, its capacity to have levels of leadership. This is very important. In most countries, you kill 2 levels of leadership and it's over. In Iran, I was interviewing somebody privately who said, we have 7 levels of leadership. I mean, I don't know, 7, 5, 4, whatever it may be. How do you kill 7 layers of leadership? You're then killing in the millions of people. That's insane. Because you don't know who the next under Minister of Agriculture is. How can you kill so many people? Yesterday I was in a show with Goldie something or the other. She was like, the United States need to attack Iran harder. So I said the next step is a nuclear bomb on Tehran. Nobody flinched. Nobody flinched.
Jesus.
And I said right then that I hope that I never reach the point where I call for this kind of attack against any people, let alone my own. Let alone my own.
She is particularly deranged.
Okay, she is deranged, boss, but I mean,
something really.
No, I know that because she just looked at the camera she was just staring at the camera on a screen without blinking, But whatever.
Do you know Goldie? For context, she had a big Israeli flag behind her.
Yeah, she had the monarchical flag.
Oh, the Shah's flag.
And then she had an Israeli-US thing, and she had other insignia that it looked like the wolf's den. There was all kinds of insignias and stuff, She's probably been awarded something by the fake king of Iran in Los Angeles. Where does she live?
I'm not sure.
She's Canadian, by the way. She's Canadian. She was a Canadian elected member of parliament or whatever, of something.
Because you do see, there's talk of connecting with like the European identity, especially in the Iranian diaspora. Like this idea of Tehran is the new Paris from the 50s or whenever. Like that still really does persist. I also wanted to maybe bring it back to the 60s in Cuba. This idea of like internationalism and how it manifests. I think Retamar's subsequent essay about this, he ends saying there is only one world. And there's a struggle. There's only one struggle between the oppressors and the oppressed. Is this sort of like a challenge to the Third World movement? And by this point in time, I think that was in the 70s. You know, Indonesia had suffered catastrophe on a policy of this like neutralist idea. What was like Cuba's relationship to Third Worldism? They were obviously like squarely in the Second World camp, but obviously there was relationships and it wasn't so like hard-lined. How do you see it?
I mean, Cuba was in the second, third, doesn't matter, it was an icon.
Yeah.
It remains an icon. Yeah, it was so fundamental to the debates and discussions about revolution in the third world. Fundamental. And I mean, you know, somebody like Retamar saying that there's basically only two positions, which is exactly what the Caliban essay says. You know, there's no nuance here, guys. You got to take a position. You know, you're an intellectual in Latin America. You got to take a position against U.S. imperialism. There's no nuance. Yeah, and in fact, it's not just him. You know, you look at later Nobel Prize winner Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Marquez was very much of that view. There's no nuance in a lot of this stuff. You just got to take a hard position. You know, are you against the way in which your continent has been brutalized? Yes or no? Yeah. You take, you know, people like, you know, whatever, the whole lot of them, Carlos Fuentes, you know, all of them were struggling and grappling with this. You know, Jorge Cortázar, you know, all of them are grappling with this problem. You know, and in my view, you know, what's important is that this problem that was there with you know, Cortázar, Galeano, you know, Galeano, I mean, Galeano writes Open Veins of Latin America, which is not a book of nuance. Yeah, it's a hardcore book. I knew him very well. You know, he was in exile from his native Uruguay, where there had been a military dictatorship. He wrote blistering essays about torture. And I'm sitting with him in Montevideo in a cafe, and I'm asking you know, Eduardo Galeano before he died about, you know, how is it that you wrote these beautiful books about torture? Like, people's bodies are being damaged, and the prose is so beautiful.
Yeah. Or
how?
Retamar's, like,
you know?
Los Otros, I think.
Huh?
Retamar's Los Otros, I think, similar.
Yeah, I mean, what's going on? And there's a line in Galeano which is beautiful, where he says that you know, because comparative advantage theory in economics, that if a country must have a comparative advantage, so England's comparative advantage was the making of wool, and Portugal's was wine. This was the examples in David Ricardo. And so you should double down on your comparative advantage, and then world trade will increase. That's the theory. It's the theory of free markets. So Galeano writes in one of his essays that Latin America's comparative advantage is torture. Such a great line, yeah? It's torture. So I'm asking him, you got to take a side, man. And the thing is, you don't write about ugly things with ugly prose. You know, I don't agree with that kind of writing, which has become sort of fashionable again, you know? This writing where you just be blunt and say it. You know, if it's a horrible thing, you just say it horribly. No, I don't want stream of consciousness writing about horrible things. I want it crafted. I want the craft.
You need to mediate it.
You're a writer. Otherwise, disappear. Don't exist there. If you're a writer, then put your craft to work. That's what Galeano says, yeah? You can take a position, but you don't write with a hammer. And that's why I wanted to make this point, that when people like Retamar says there's only two sides, the oppressor and the oppressed, they don't mean scream into the wind. Tell a story beautifully. But don't forget that underneath the story is two sides. when you read Gabriel Garcia Marquez, a product of this whole tradition, when you read his 100 Years of Solitude, one of the finest novels out there, it's not magical realism. It's about an actual massacre of plantation workers in his native Colombia, in the town where he grew up. Banana workers were massacred when they tried to make a union. But he writes about it so beautifully. It's so beautiful, the prose. It's elevating, yeah? It never leaves you. And the hope is that when you read a book like 100 Years of Solitude, you shut the book becoming a better human being. You don't have to go out there with a sign saying save the earth, yeah? But you're a better person. And if more and more people read these, they are better people, and then maybe they come together and they change the world. You have to take a side, but you don't take a side without also putting craft at the service of, so the debate around intellectualism and so on wasn't about like everybody starts screaming. Yeah, everybody starts screaming. No, it's not. Frankly speaking, you know, I really like a lot of the poetry, the pre-revolution Iranian poetry. I like, you know, Faruzad. I love her poetry, yeah? Farooq's poetry is sublime, but I know people have a problem with it because, you know, whatever, yeah? Beautiful poetry. Why? Because she took craft seriously. You don't need to scream. That's a mistake people make about committed writing. Those who are committed to, say, revolution, you know, Retamar and so on, that doesn't mean you write like a bozo. Yeah, you got to write with some flippin' feeling. And also, if you're a democratic-minded person, a progressive-minded, be progressive and democratic towards your reader. Like, make the story interesting. Don't burden your reader with dullness, yeah? Because that's undemocratic.
Yeah. A lot of the piece, and part of why we're talking about this is about how intellectual products are produced and disseminated. And he kind of inflammatorily calls the Mexican literary mafia constantly. And I think two of the biggest examples he points to are, I don't know how to pronounce it, but Borges, who he thinks is really over-proliferated. Marty, who's kind of become obscure, and obviously especially in the West. And a lot of his argument is about these kind of mediators, so this Mexican literary mafia. I wonder if A, you could sort of describe how that worked at the time, and B, how it works now.
Okay, so firstly, I love going to bookshops, yeah? But bookshops are not where I find the books I enjoy reading, yeah? Bookshops are today, and have been for a while, are controlled by literary agents, by big capitalist publishing houses, and at the tables, they pay money to get their books there. Yeah, and there's just dross. There's just a lot of garbage. Some of the garbage I like reading. Yeah, some of them are fun. You read on the train or whatever it is, a nice, brisk, you know, quick novel. Yeah, I don't mind that. I actually enjoy novels of that kind. Yeah, so once in a way. There's also just really bad non-fiction books that come to the surface, and you wonder. It's not Mexican X, Y, Z. It's not even, you know, New York X, Y. It's nothing like that. It's that they have made culture into commodities, you know. And this has been there at the time of Retamar to now. There is a way in which culture has become so commodified, so totally commodified, that they don't care about building communities of readers or communities of any kind. Yeah, that's not the point. The point is to sell you a book. Which, you know, maybe has hidden in it product placement. I don't even know what's going on in some of these things. You know, why are they mentioning some brands? You know, is there really product placement in a novel? Probably. I don't know. They have them in movies. Maybe big authors go and say, look, my character in my next novel is going to drive a car. If I get X from this company, let's say I name a car company now, am I getting paid to use the name of the car company? We don't even know anymore, yeah? Product placement. I am not mentioning any brands. But you see, I don't mention any brands because I'm not getting paid by anybody. If you, on the other hand, hook me up with one or two of your brands, I would be quite happy to mention pens that if they gave me free pens, I would bring them out and use them and so on, yeah? But obviously, I don't have that kind of market potential for them.
Well,
but
we can sort that out.
I'm not against that. Yeah, I need a good fountain pen. Yeah. So anyway, that's a separate issue. Just saying. Yeah, that's a separate issue. But coming back to this idea of see, look, firstly, Jose Luis Borges is an amazing writer because he is inventive, super conservative politically, but it doesn't matter. He's completely inventive, yeah, and he plays with all kinds of things. When I found his book Ficciones as a kid and read the stories, I had no idea that Boy Casares was a real person. Because it's a character in his stories. I turned to my friend Boy Casares and I said, Boy Casares, what's happening with XY? This is a real writer who lived in Buenos Aires, Argentina. Yeah. Then he has these amazing stories about China, completely fantasy China. Yeah. You could write, bloody academics could write books about the Orientalism or whatever, but man, no academic can write as well as Borges does in his fantasies, you know, the Garden of Walking Paths. These stories are remarkable, yeah? But it's all frustrating for people like Retamar because they are in a life and death struggle against the Yankee. And at no point does Borges say, down with the Yankee. Yeah. Not even, I don't even mean just say down with the Yankee, but in no story is there like the ugly Yankee
and he's embedded in like these institutional...
Yes, that's the other part of it. He gets therefore lifted up. Frankly, he's a great writer. Okay. So it's lucky that he gets lifted up.
So do you think it's funny that I mean, Retamar seems to admire Sarmiento, who he calls a proto-fascist, more than Borges. Do you think that's sort of a farce?
Well, look, it's in different moments you pick on different people. Yeah, if I don't want to pick on, I'm a humanitarian, so I don't like to name names of people I dislike. Yeah,
I don't believe you.
No, I am a humanitarian and generally a kind, nice person, and so I'm not going to name like these are the people I hate today, writers, you know, that take up all the space or whatever it is. I don't care if they get read a lot and nobody reads anything I write. That doesn't bother me. I don't have that kind of ego problem. But I know what he's doing. He's picking on the big figure. You know, you have entered the sky and your sun is given so much energy that it's eclipsed everything everybody else is trying to say. So all these people who are saying Yankee, Yankee, Yankee are not getting through because everybody's saying the Latin American writer Borges. Yeah, you can't break through. Of course, this is not going to last long because Gabriel Garcia Marquez emerges and Marquez is from the left. Yeah. So it would actually been interesting for Retamar to have later gone back to his institutional problem. Because now the politics of the Latin American writer has changed. And Marquez himself was self-reflective about the role he was playing as the Latin American writer. So, of course, there's institutional channels, but the institutional argument weakens a little bit because it does move from a man of the right to a man of the left, which is Garcia Marquez, yeah? I mean, Marquez is a friend of Fidel Castro and writes the most celebrated novel from Latin America, promoted everywhere. Yeah, now a Netflix series and whatnot. So institutionally, the argument is complicated. Yeah, in fact, it's interesting. In this same period, Armand Matelat and the Chilean writer, forgotten his name, wrote a book called How to Read Donald Duck. Yeah. It's a very interesting communications theory book about comics and cartoons being imposed on the Latin American children and so on. And it's about cultural imperialism for little kids, how it's entering the space and so on. This is a big debate in Latin America. So Retamar is just sort of reflecting this, and he picks on Borges. I would say, pal, wrong target, number one. And secondly, what if you had waited a few years for the essay with Marquez as the big hero? How would you have then written your essay?
It's sort of a blind spot of the polemicist style, is that you kind of weave in like half-truths or complete fictions to make a point. Do you kind of, is that type of polemicism lost now? Do you have any kind of soft spot for it? Do you miss it?
Me?
Yeah.
I just told you I'm a humanitarian. I don't have the appetite for it. I mean,
no, not even to read it.
I generally feel uncomfortable reading texts like that.
Okay.
Just to be, it's a personal thing. Like I once read Edward Thompson's Savaging of Louis Althusser. Firstly, I couldn't make head or tail of most of it. But also it was just,
Of Althusser or Thompson?
Of Thompson's attack on Althusser. It's called The Poverty of Theory. It's a long, rambling essay, but whatever it is, generally I find these one-on-one things hard to take.
Yeah.
I come from that tradition, having read a lot of Lenin, attacking Kautsky, attacking people. You know, I just find that one-on-one thing, that one-on-one polemic, a little difficult for me personally. I don't have the appetite for it to read or to write. I generally think that it's more useful to do a broader cultural look. You know, what is the appetite of the culture? You know, what is the culture capable of doing? Today, for instance, let's take the so-called West, yeah? I just watched Homer's, you know, The Odyssey, Christopher Nolan. I wrote a review of it because the film interested me a lot. Firstly, I must say that the accents were such that there were moments when I was like, I wish they had subtitles because I wasn't getting the American accent, you know, which is curious. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. This attempt by Nolan is interesting because Christopher Nolan is basically the filmmaker of Western collapse, Western guilt with Oppenheimer, that the West has done something bad and worse is coming. And in this film, the violation of Xenia, Zeus's law. You know, Odysseus violates Xenia by building the Trojan horse, says Nolan, and therefore the world goes to hell. Yeah, it's not just the blinding of Poseidon's son, you know, the Cyclops. It's not that. It's the Trojan horse that violates the hospitality law. It's a reciprocal law. They entered Troy under false pretenses and then slaughtered the city. That violated the law. So redemption had to come. The West brought its destruction upon itself. That's Christopher Nolan's argument. That's actually been there since at least the Oppenheimer film, but I'm actually seeing traces of it now, thinking back to the Dark Knight trilogy. You can see bits of it, this whole police state, you know, sort of sucking the life out of liberalism, you know, liberal potential. But in these two films, the lead character is racked by guilt, remorse, and exhaustion. Like Odysseus, Matt Damon's Odysseus, just feels exhausted. Like at no point in the film, except maybe when he's fighting, does he feel energetic. He just feels exhausted. The West is exhausted. So I watch a film like that and I think, wow, that's interesting. He's captured the moment. The West is exhausted. Yeah, it's totally exhausted. Its cultural debates are exhausted. I pick up magazines or newspapers in the West and the arguments are tired. Yeah, Andy Burnham, I mean, you know, Keir Starmer, I mean, what is this? It's pathetic. Yeah. It's exhausting. Yeah, it's exhausting. They all look like tired old men, even though they are younger than me. Isn't that amazing? Yeah. Andy Burnham is younger than me, but I just look at him and think, man, you're trying so hard to be young. You're tiring me out. Yeah. You know, this is a bomb. Or I don't even know what he's talking about in his Instagram reels. Anyway.
It's embarrassing. Yeah.
We're chit-chatting about all kinds of things.
I haven't seen a Nolan film in a long time.
Huh?
I haven't seen a Nolan film in a long time.
You haven't seen Odysseus?
I saw Tenet and I was like so bored.
Interstellar?
No.
You didn't see Interstellar?
Again, I paid to see Tenet and I was like, I'm not
Okay, but you know, Emily Wilcox, who wrote what I think is really an interesting review of the film because she's a translator.
The Odyssey.
Yeah, she is the most recent translator. It's a really long but interesting review. In the first paragraph, she said the nastiest thing. She said, basically, I went to see it because of the air conditioning.
I do that.
Yeah, but that's just a nasty thing to say. I mean, and Christopher Nolan doesn't care because he made millions out of this film. Yeah, hundreds of millions. I don't know how much he made. He and his wife are the sole producers. Yeah, they made a lot of money. This film is done extremely well.
Yeah.
And it's entertaining.
No, I think his films are entertaining. In the
Oppenheimer?
cinema. No, I didn't see it.
The three of them?
The cinema is really expensive. It's like £12 to get a ticket, and like IMAX.
You don't have a cinema correspondent for the magazine?
Angel View is pretty good.
Well, I went to see it at the Electric in Portobello Road, and I took the sofa bed. Do you know, have you ever been there? Yeah, I had the sofa bed, and I got myself a soda, and I lay back there, and my partner is Russian, and so through the movie she natted to me in an amazing Russian accent, which I think scared the people sitting next to us, because they thought we were like a Russian Muslim dangerous cell. We had two backpacks, big black backpacks sitting there. I felt bad for that couple. There's nothing worse than a Russian... Huh?
You're talking the whole time to the film.
Well, the thing is, it's not called talking, it's called discussions.
No, after the film. Yeah, you gotta hold it in.
That's not possible.
It's not possible.
Firstly, I couldn't understand the accents.
Wait, is it the same as Bane in the Batman film? What's it called?
In this film, it's just in the beginning, particularly, I found it difficult. And there were some characters I just couldn't understand.
Yeah. Really? Oh, what do you think of Sigourney Weaver as Prospero?
Like a play?
Yeah, Prospero does an American accent. I thought Sigourney Weaver was going to do put an accent on, but no, they just had everyone else had English accent.
Why would you get Sigourney Weaver if you didn't want her to be herself? You know, it's big money.
Yeah, it's big money. Yeah.
Maybe.
What's the best play playing now? No, can't see that.
Why not?
Huh?
Why not? You'll go and see the Odyssey.
Yeah, but that's a movie. I'm not going to see a musical theater with Muppets. If it was the Wombles.
It seems equally as stupid to me.
No, if it was the Wombles. Anybody know the Wombles?
Yeah.
Yeah, if it was the Wombles, I would have gone. Because I spent a summer of 1975 with my grandmother in London, and that was my only really TV show she allowed me to watch. The Wombles of Wimbledon Common. Who was the one? I like the Scottish Womble. McWomble. That's all they did to his name, McWomble.
This is exactly what they did to the Latin American identity.
McWomble?
Yeah.
Well, Che Guevara is Irish, you know.
Really?
Yeah, his grandmother, I think, is Irish. In fact, in Ireland, there's a Che Guevara stamp.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, it's an official stamp. He's Che Guevara something. Yeah.
Doesn't have the same ring to it.
No, but he's actually Irish.
Womble.
Yeah, not Womble. I mean, that would be ridiculous because I met his daughter.
Really?
I don't think Wombles can have children.
They
Tobermory. That was one of the Wombles. Tobermory.
Yeah.
You don't know them intimately.
Not really. I know they exist. I watched them.
Yeah. It was before your time.
I don't know. I'm older than them.
What do you mean? This is how shows should end.
I know. I agree. Well, this is how we do things.
This is how life ends.
You don't say like goodbye. You just die.
At some point, we just cut to the
To hear more podcasts from Tank, you can subscribe on all major podcast platforms or follow us on SoundCloud. The theme music for this podcast is by Himera.